Yay! This is going to be so great. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're live, if you're here and it's live, awesome. What's up, Mary? Yeah! Madison is going to join me soon where we get to have conversations about grief. So I'm going to let people roll in. Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. I love seeing everybody wave. This is so cool. Oh my gosh, how fun is this? Everyone is waving. This is great. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's see. Has Madison joined us yet? Let's see. Not yet. Oh, this is great. This is going to be so fun. Thank you for being willing. Here we go. Okay. There we go. Madison's coming in. This is going to be such a great conversation. Yay, she's here. Waiting for you, girl. Just sent it. Waiting for Madison, it says. Connecting. Awesome.
Yay!
Yay! Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let me turn you up a little bit. Hold on one second.
Okay.
There we go. Oh,
better?
It says
it's so good to see you.
It's spinning right now, the connection is, but I don't know if that's my side or your side.
Okay, well, if it is my side, I'll just make a trip across the house.
Cool.
So let me know, because I hear you pretty clearly. Am I good?
I see your face, but it's not showing your lips moving, but I don't know if it's me. Can anybody else see Madison? Do you see her talking, or is it a picture right now? Let's see if anybody responds.
Cool.
Because
if not, I'll just jump across the house.
Cool. My house is, I see Miller, the answer is yes. I don't know what's happening. Let's see.
I saw Whitney and Abby. Can't see me. Okay. Erin, I'm going to just X out.
Okay.
Go make myself a space across the house. Be right back.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, until she joins us, first off, my dog right here is insistent that she sits with me. She was crying. So, yeah, we'll just see what happens. Also, I chopped my hands and I cut my hands. So if you see this, it's just my makeshift bandage that I have right now. I know it sounds weird to say that I'm actually really excited to talk about grief. If you are currently going through something really hard right now, I'm not excited that you are going through the waves of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I don't want you to think that I am taking joy in that. But what I am excited about is that it's really scared to approach. And sometimes it's hard because we don't have people in our life to approach it with. And so that's the point of us being able to talk about this now. And I'm really, really excited to have Madison join us and for us to just kind of, we all asked a few questions and we want to answer them. And then we also just kind of want to, I have a few books here. I'll show you my situation that I got right here. Books, some books. And I'm really, really excited. Oh my gosh, Madison, there you are, girl.
Yay! The lighting is way worse in here, but
you're good.
So it is.
Hey, you look gorgeous.
Well, thank you. I will let you know that my husband might be home, and he might just make a appearance in the door. And so I don't think so, but I just want to let you know that could happen. So
that is totally cool. Tell him welcome.
I will. And it's such an unfortunate thing that my home office gets terrible Wi-Fi. Like that's unfortunate.
No, I totally get it. When I lived up in the country, there would be this threshold I'd cross, and then I would lose all service and all people and all connection to anything. So you are so good.
Yeah.
There's a few things. One, I wanted to read a quote, but before I go into that, I would love for you to introduce yourself, what you do, and then we can kind of dive into talking about some of these questions people submitted and just see what other questions people put through our feed.
Yeah, so I honestly wanted to start just by collectively kind of taking a breath, because this is a heavy topic. And so just if you're listening, I know this is maybe awkward to be watching two people take a breath, but I honestly just wanted to close my eyes and just take a deep breath with you, Erin.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank, like, seriously, each of you who are watching live and who are watching the replay or watching later. And Erin, thank you, because I love you so much as a person and love the way that you give and serve your community. And just so clearly, every person in your life, we've had some really intimate and beautiful conversations that just so were about being fully human, which is exactly what my work is about. And being human involves the beautiful things, which I'm all for. I've got beautiful flowers like here on my table. And it also includes the grief, which sometimes includes hard conversations at this kitchen table, right? And so essentially what I do is I help women, and particularly women, but some men interact with my work as well. But I help women who are awakening to something in their life, be it their faith is changing, or they've gone through a relationship shift, or they're just awakening to deeper truth in themselves. And in that process, actually have to grieve a lot of who they used to be, a lot of the life they thought was comfortable for them, and then awaken to a new life. And so what's coming is always so exciting and so beautiful, but that process getting there often includes some hard decisions and some hard things. And I help women through that process. And so usually the grief that I'm working with women on isn't around someone passing away, although that does happen. I'm not like a grief coach or a grief therapist, but the human condition, the human experience includes grief, and we cannot bypass that on our way to a happy life. It's included.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's kind of what I do.
That is so good. And I remember, like, we've known each other for how long?
I've been following you for a really long time.
A few years, right?
We met officially in New York in person, but I was like always commenting and creeping, and finally you were like, okay, I'll be your friend.
No, not even. Because I remember, like, I mean, we knew each other because I guess through So Worth Loving, and then just through social media. And then you had a podcast, right?
Yes, and the podcast I had is still going. It's called The Bravery Board. I'm just no longer a part of it. And so they still have a podcast. I'm just not one of the hosts. So I interviewed you on there.
That's what it was.
And
because you talked about
what did they say?
And you let me nerd out on all the things I was reading at the time.
Yes. What is that quote? It's a biblical quote, and it's talking about with God that if you just beg, if you pray enough, God will be like, fine, I'll give you. And that was like our friendship. I was like, I just am going to keep showing up. And you were like, I just wore you down. You're like, okay. So you're God and I'm a person, I guess. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's funny because I'm so ADD. So when someone is persistent and consistent, it like I'm like, oh, yes. Like there's no other reason for me to not engage other than being a ping pong. So
I know, I'm that same way. And also, like, whenever I decide that I want someone to be my friend, I'm like, I've decided. Yeah. So are you in? Exactly. I'm glad it worked out.
Well, I do remember I was going through a really, really just hard, dark season. Actually, I feel like I was not even in the middle of it. I think I was entering into it when you and I like physically met in New York City. And then we went and got brunch. Didn't we get brunch? It was brunch, right? Or was it lunch? It was
brunch because you had the gluten-free pancakes or something,
right.
And you're very excited about it.
My favorite place, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was in West Village or Greenwich in Chelsea Market. And I just remember I had been, I've been on a lot of stages in front of a lot of people and a lot of pressure and people having this like idea of who I was, but not knowing who I was. And, just a lot of like glamour, I guess some people would see online. They didn't maybe know. And so for you and I to sit and have brunch, and you were asking me what I was going through and what was life. And I was just honest. And it was just so nice. Your response, it was like, you didn't disqualify me. You didn't discredit me. And you were there. And that was such a beautiful conversation that I held so close to me in that season of entering into that. it gave me doses of bravery that I needed. And so I never had expressed that to you, but I just want you to know that.
Yeah, that means so much to me because I understand that like social media, it can be a barrier to actually intimately knowing someone. And you were very vulnerable with me and you did not have to be. And so that made me feel also because and I know how much you value boundaries and safe people and the fact that you opened up to me in that way. I think because I knew your boundaries, it like also elevates the conversation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like knowing that we're both people that value integrity and value boundaries and that this is sacred information is like established from the beginning. It doesn't have to be said because I knew your character.
Exactly.
So
you just know when you enter into conversations like that, there are certain characteristics that you're like, you're safe. You're not safe. Right?
Yeah.
You just feel it. And I think you gain that gut the more you get burned.
Yes. And the more you do
me,
the inner work, which you so clearly have, like you're not just getting burned and then like staying burned. You're getting burned and then leading into your healing, which is a huge difference.
Absolutely. And there was a quote that I wanted to read that's from this book, Option B, which is like by far one of my most favorite books I've ever read. For some reason, I think it's because it was like, it entered in, actually I finished it on the plane ride back from New York after we met. And I loved this. It's so simple, from Sheryl Sandberg. She says, after undergoing hardship, people have new knowledge to offer those who go through similar experiences. It is a unique source of meaning because it does not just give our lives purpose. It gives our suffering purpose. People help where they've been hurt so that their wounds are not in vain. Oh. So good.
So good.
And I think in, you and I talking about grief, I was saying earlier, right before you joined us, I'm not, it's weird to say I'm excited to talk about grief. I'm not excited for anybody that they've entered into it, or they are in the middle of it, or at the end of it, or in a wave, whatever it may be. I'm not excited about that, but I'm excited that there's people around them and a community of people that want to talk about what are those things? Like, what is denial? What is anger? What is bargaining? What is acceptance? What does depression look like? When you can identify where you're at, that helps the healing process. And I wanted to hear, I mean, what do you think when you hear that?
I actually just had, and it was Option B. I see some people saying, what was that book again? And it's Option B. And I also highly recommend it. It was really of service to me. I read it about a year and a half ago, and it was so important to me. And I actually wanted to talk, there was a lot of questions that came in, at least on my social media, and then I think on yours as well, that were about the stages of grief. And I just had a really interesting conversation with my friend Barbara Aroshna, who is a coach and then trauma specialist. And she and I did a podcast about overcoming trauma. And actually, she is an Enneagram 2, like you are, and I'm a 7. And so we actually talked about trauma, healing trauma from a heart space and healing trauma if you're oriented from a head space. So we just talked about our experiences. And I wanted to share something that she shared with me on that. And it'll be out shortly in the next couple weeks. But she said that people often talk about this stages of grief as if grief doesn't come up in different seasons of our life. And the kind of grief that I experience and that she experienced is actually around, it's very ongoing. It's around family and trauma. It wasn't around the loss of a person. And which even with the loss of a person, it's this way as well. And she said, what if we switched it from this thing that gets smaller and smaller and smaller to if you look at this vast blue sky, and there's this like gray cloud, and the gray cloud, whenever you're in it, is like it's consuming. And then as you grow and as you're healing, you start to get more perspective, but the cloud doesn't go anywhere. The sky and the life expand around it and get bigger around it, but that gray cloud doesn't actually ever leave. And I had some questions about this myself, of just like, well, what about whenever you're healing from trauma, and what if like coping mechanisms change? But what I really appreciated about that was that there are times where grief comes up again in a different season in a new way. And it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean you've taken steps backwards. It's just that that new season of your life is triggering that grief in a new way. And it's actually a part of the big life. And so the pain or the thing you went through isn't getting less significant, but your life is getting bigger, which felt so much better than like the grief has to just get smaller until it's almost nothing.
Right, because then you almost you view grief as a bad thing or a shameful thing.
Yeah.
Or you feel guilty. Yeah. You feel burdened. Like I know for me, like when I was, and I'm still in the grieving cycle after my divorce. And now I've been able to accept, okay, this, and what I like about, well, a few things. One, what I like about the stages of grief, in this book, Cheryl talks about with this psychologist, I think his name's Adam Grant. It's states of grief. Because once you have denial, it doesn't mean you don't go back into it, or into anger, or into bargaining, or into depression. And like, I went through like really dark time, and I thought that like the depression had been done, and it hadn't. Mm-hmm. It was a wave. And I think when we can recognize that there's states and not stages, and that it could be a wave you're experiencing, you do feel less shameful about it and less of a burden and less like guilty. Because I knew that I felt kind of guilty. Like, gosh, I'm like that friend that's like, she's just talking about it still. And like, and then you like isolate yourself because you're like, I talked about it too much. Like, they don't want to talk about it anymore. And so then you're like, but that is just being honest with where you're at. And I don't know, but I loved that it's states and like not stages, and knowing that like the waves will come in and out. And for me, like recently, I was with my therapist. I go to a trauma therapist, and he had said that depression is an expression of suppressed sadness. And I think for 2, or 7, or anybody that's like, or even a 9, we're like, anger, push it down. No.
That's bad. Yeah.
I can't be angry about, a loss in my life, whether it's a death, or like emotionally or physically, or if it's trauma from past childhood, or whatever it may be. If you don't allow yourself to be angry, it still comes out.
Yeah.
And to know that it's okay to not have shame in that. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, whenever I'm working with the women in my program or through coaching, something I do notice is a lot of these women are women, and regardless their Enneagram number, they're women who want to help other people, and they want to be of service. And they, especially in either the self-help world or the Christian world, there's this idea that we have to be positive. And if we're not being positive, that means that we are holding on to anger. We're not forgiving. So even this idea that forgiveness means we no longer feel feelings we don't like. Like, if you've forgiven, you just need to get over it. You need to shove it down. So there's this, like, I see this misconception around forgiveness, or even this idea that if we accept what someone else did or what happened, it negates the way it made us feel. And so we have a lot of resistance around forgiveness, or we also have a lot of shoulds around the way that we should be reacting and should have responded. And it's like, what if we just allowed ourselves more space in the human experience? And so in my work, I don't really teach my women the stages of grief. Obviously, I'll recommend books about grief, but what I try to teach them is full expression of your human experience. That there are no bad emotions, there are no bad feelings, and even if you feel unforgiveness towards someone, that doesn't actually reflect on your character. Because I think that's what a lot of us feel, is like, if I feel this thing that I've judged as bad, then I'm a bad person. Or if I'm still talking about this, then I'm being negative. And we're actually doing people, like, whenever you were telling me about the things you were going through, it actually made me feel like you trusted me. It made me feel like I was connected to you. Whereas some people would be like, oh, I was just talking about negative things, but you were
Right.
sharing your experience, which actually we weren't gossiping. We weren't in
Right.
just being negative to spew drama. There's like a tangible, like I almost want to say like an essence difference
Mm.
between stirring the pot of drama and then being honest and real and genuine. And so
Yeah.
to kind of talk about what you were saying of like this, I don't want to overload onto people and I feel bad for doing this. And then also, so I guess one piece of that is not judging ourselves for the human experience, which many of us were
Yeah.
taught growing up that our
Yeah.
human experience is wrong. And then the other part is that whenever we like are vulnerable, like knowing that we're being vulnerable with the right people. And I think that we mentioned safe people in the beginning, but it is something I wanted to bring up because truly not everyone deserves or has capacity for your grief. And if we are sharing that with people who are triggered by anger because they haven't dealt with their own anger or don't know how to be with someone else's sadness, we're going to interpret their negative response like we've done something wrong when they just aren't the right person to be sharing that with.
That is so, oh, that is so on
It's
point.
huge.
That is such a huge thing. Like, I think we need to talk about that more because, gosh, I mean, when somebody responds to your grief, that could potentially be a trigger for them. They project their own stuff on you, and you're so
Yes.
vulnerable to just because you're so confused. You're in a state of confusion. You don't know if you're swimming up to get air or down to the sand or sideways. You're like, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to swim. And so when you experience a person that has been triggered by anger or depression or whatever it may be, man, it can be so dangerous for your own healing in your own heart.
And
That's
often people
so,
mean
yeah.
well. Like I
Yeah.
have dear friends who, whenever I'm sharing something about my life, they mean well. Or my husband and I, this is a silly example, but we'll have an argument. And then if I'm not cautious who I share that with, one friend would say, oh, well, you should leave. And again, this is hypothetical, but you should
Right.
leave because like that they're not comfortable sitting in the discomfort. And then another
Mhm.
friend will be like, oh, well, you're fine.
Yeah.
And neither are necessarily helpful. But it's, I think, about me knowing where do I take what I'm processing to the right person, to someone who isn't afraid of their own emotions, isn't
Yeah.
afraid of the human experience, and also isn't like with you. I'm not going to speak to your experience, but I imagine with you going through divorce, there are a lot of people who had judgments about divorce who are not safe. And that's just an assumption,
Yeah.
but I can imagine.
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And some of the results of or the symptom or disease that was in my marriage was it definitely shook some households because they may have been wrestling that I had no clue about. So
Yeah.
projection was a huge piece that made me feel ashamed and felt guilty and felt just, but I had no clue what was going on. I just keep talking about Sheryl Sandberg, but I love
So
this
great.
quote because it was just another one that was really good. She talks about being her friend. For those of y'all that don't know Sheryl Sandberg, in the book Option B, she talks about her husband tragically passes away, 10 years of marriage, and it was very, very sudden, and she found him. And so she talks about her grieving cycle of that. And she goes, being my friend meant not just comforting me in my grief, but dealing with a level of anger that I'd never felt before and struggled to control. I needed friends who let me know that even if I was difficult to be around, they would never abandon me. And I think that is what we're talking about in regards to like gauging who is a safe person. And that is finding, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be one or two people that checks in. If they know that your mornings are hard and your evenings are hard and your afternoons are hard, hour to hour is hard, and you're going to be isolating yourself, ignoring texts, they aren't going to take offense to it because you just experienced trauma. They're going to lean into you more because they love you and they know who you are at your core. And right now, the way you're acting is out of a response of pain. And I think that that can be so confusing if you have friends that don't respond well to your trauma. When you say,
Yeah. I think that having, again, the right people is so important, and then knowing what you need. And that is really difficult whenever you're, especially if the grief is traumatic, because I think, like, I wrote this down, I have some notes behind my laptop, that there are so many kinds of grief. And I think that that is often really misunderstood, that like that grief has to be a thing that just happened, or it was a death, or it was a loss of a marriage. Because as you mentioned earlier, sometimes it is a sexual trauma, and then going home for Christmas re-triggers that sexual trauma. And maybe you're fine like 9 months out of the year, but those months where you have to go visit family or you interact with certain people, it gets reactivated, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're back at square one again with that grief. And so whenever we're dealing with ongoing grief, which is often what I'm dealing with in my life personally, in the beginning, often we don't know how to even address our needs. So it's really tricky to tell someone who just experienced a huge trauma, oh, well, just tell people what you need, because having access to that whenever you're just in fight or flight, you're just functioning, surviving, is really challenging.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think, like you mentioned, you're in trauma therapy. It's, if you don't have anyone in your life and you're going through a true, like right now, immediate traumatic grief experience, it's really great to get yourself in a situation that is a supportive therapeutic environment. Because you might not know how to ask for what you need, and that person is trained to be with you in that capacity.
Yeah.
And not to say that if you're dealing with ongoing grief, you shouldn't, because again, I've been through therapy, but something that I've tried to do now is like tell my husband, okay, we're going to visit family. I'm going to need this kind of support from you, because it's pretty clear in my life that I'm reactivated by this trauma during these times of the year. And that's taken years to get there for me.
That's beautiful that you can identify that.
It's taken a long time. It's taken so long. And even still, I go in and I'm like, it's going to be better this time. It's going to be better. And then again, that wave of disappointment hits, and I spend about a week recovering, even still after years of therapy and years of doing a lot of inner work. And I think what I'm coming to now is an acceptance of the grief experience, that it doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong, that I'm having a grief experience. I'm not like, I used to think maybe I'm just not doing enough self-care. Maybe I'll just meditate more. Maybe I'll just, and those things can help. They really can be supportive. And going to see a therapist, like that was super supportive, but it didn't take away from the fact that the feelings would still come. And I needed to know what to do when those feelings came. And I needed to know who was safe when those feelings came. And sometimes it was like, okay, I just need a couple days alone, and I need no one to bother me about this. And my way of communicating that was just not responding to messages and not having any guilt about that, not shaming myself for that. I feel like I'm taking a detour, but did that kind of answer?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the beauty of it, though, is like just allowing yourself to be okay, which is like sitting in grief instead of, the other day I sat with a friend. This is a good example of an unfinished thought I was having, but I was sitting with a friend at lunch, and he said to me, he goes, Erin, you've done more work in the last 2 years than a lot of people have done in 10. He was like, go watch a comedy show. Read a fun novel. That's what he told me, because I was just like, I just wanted to make sure I'm doing all the work and I'm working on myself, and I'm being hard on because I told him, I was like, man, I just came out of like this like wave of heavy depression, of just like feeling hopeless and sad, and then guilty for being sad, and then I feel guilty for being depressed because I've got people that believe in me, and why can't I just have like gratitude and joy, and like why am I like, and he just told me, he's like, accept that you have done work, and like be okay with that, like be content, find contentment in that. And that was really good for me to hear, to be like, be content with where you're at right now, no need to work hard, don't feel guilty, you've done a lot of work, just be content, and
And those moments of relief, of like the comedy, like what great advice from a friend who's like, allow yourself to laugh, okay?
Yeah.
That's okay too.
He goes, what books are you reading that aren't self-care? And I'm like,
oh, I hate when my friends ask me that. Like, get that
uh,
away from me.
let me answer that. And then I'm like, well, how do I research books that aren't about self-care? Like funny books.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so far from like, because I can get so lost in my head and just like, but yeah. So I want to dive into some questions that we received because I know we got 30 more minutes.
Do you mind real quick if I just pause and interject one thing there? Because this just came up in my program with a woman who's like, I've done so much. It was like literally word for word what you said. And obviously I'm not going to share her private details, but she was like just struggling with not having another big thing, another big breakthrough to wrestle with. And we were chatting and I was like, what if this season of your process is allowed to be easy? And what if it's allowed to not be so difficult? Like, I know you've come through so many hard things. And sometimes those of us who've gone through a lot of hard things start expecting that it always has to be hard. Just like in the opposite way of like, I resist any negative feelings, we can also resist whenever life wants to open up and get lighter for us and just allow us to watch the comedy or to watch something that's vulgar and trashy TV show. But it's just like that moment of relief. And it's like, what if the thing life wants to teach you about this grief is that it's okay to have the highs and the lows, to have the joyful moments, and to let it like uproot as it wants. Because I don't know about you, but once I get going on like a self-development kick, I'm like digging and digging and digging and like how much can I heal here? Yeah. And it's like
article after article after article.
Yeah, like wow, like what if you just took a breath and integrated and like let there be some space between trying to get to that next level or the next stage of your healing and just enjoyed the process. And we're talking about grief, so enjoying the process is like, but
no, it's true though. It's do you hear my dog? She's like pouting right now. Real quick.
No, I don't hear her, but I'd love to.
She's so mad that I kicked her off the bar stool earlier.
Sweet baby.
Sorry, if y'all hear purring or this like weird chicken noise, it's her. It's just going ahead. If y'all hear it, that's what's going on.
Yeah. No, it's great.
No, but that's so good. That's so good. Okay, questions. So there's a few that we've got. We have talk about grieving broken dreams. How should one handle grieving the loss of a friendship from somebody who was so toxic? Dealing with grief of people that have not passed away, but you need to have out of your life, very similar to what we're saying, like ex-lovers, ex-husband, ex-girlfriend. Obstacle for me is the regret of what might have been if I did something different. It's a really great one. And how do I let others support me in my grief process? Okay, so there's a few, but I think we could touch first on maybe talk about the grieving of broken dreams.
Yeah, so good.
No, so let's talk about grieving of broken dreams. Have you ever experienced a dream that you had, or something you've envisioned for your life, and then you realize this is not going to happen? It's just not. Have you ever experienced that?
I feel like I can be pretty go with the flow about things. Like whenever I realize that something isn't for me, I can let go pretty easily. Yeah. However, until I let go, it is a struggle. Okay. If that makes sense. Like once I make the decision, I can like be like, the chapter is closed. Yeah. For me, those things have more so been relationships than like dreams, as far as like dreams and career. Yeah. I'm curious if you have. I mean, I would still speak to it, but I was just wondering if you've ever experienced that.
Yeah, I have. I think for divorce, you have a dream that your relationship is going to be one way. And then you find your relationship is not at all what you thought it was. And so there's a piece to that. But then also, I think the dream for me with my business, I had dreamt that I kind of had created this world in my mind that my marriage was going to be this, my business was going to be this, and all these things were transpiring. And I think honestly, I was in too much of a dreamland to be realistic with what my actual current situation was.
Wow.
And so then when I actually entered into my reality, my dream absolutely dissipated. And it was probably one of the most painful things, because it was coming from both sides, business and personal.
It's like everything is pulled out from under you.
My whole reality was completely changed. And but at the same time, and someone said this to me about 2 years ago, they said, when things, like when dreams die, or like when you go through a hard time, it involves radical pivoting. So you pivot instead of seeing it as like a death of a dream. It's a pivot to something else that you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And you learn so much about yourself with that. Like, I learned so much about where I found my contentment, my security. I found my security in my job and in my relationship. And so when my job struggled and my relationship was no longer, who was I? Where did I find my security? Where did I find my contentment? And so it was kind of like, while I had to be just sad and let myself be angry and sad and depressed, I was able to find where I found true contentment and security. And it can't be found in anything like my job. And my ex-husband could never, ever fill the shoes to where I could be, find my own self in security, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And you know what's funny is whenever you ask that question, and whenever I received that question, I immediately interpret it through like work.
Yeah.
Which for me, I'm like, oh, well, I just pivot.
Yeah.
But as you were giving that really personal answer, I was just like, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. Because something I've shared with you is I completely deconstructed my faith. And like, I don't know why I didn't even think about this in the beginning of you asking this question, but the two things that I have to, I call it grieving the future. I don't know if that's how this person intended the question, but whenever I have gone to therapy in the past with trauma therapy, all my trauma is around the future. All of my trauma isn't about what happened. It's about how I interpret that what happened impacting my future. And so on one of these instances, it is my family hasn't chosen a path of healing, which unfortunately means that not only did I miss out on a childhood that was really stable, part of me feels like, oh, I've made peace with that. I've done a lot of work around that. But what really gets activated for me when I visit for the holidays, when I talk to family, is that because my family has not done the same amount of work and healing I have, I don't get to have the relationships with them that I long for. Yeah. And that impacts the way that I communicate with friends, the way that I feel about friends and their families, the way that I interact with my husband, the way that I can feel alone or unsupported in my life, because I don't have that solid. I have many siblings, but none that I'm extremely close with. And for me, that is not just ongoing grief of the present, but acceptance that that is their right to choose and I can't control it, means I have to also confront the grief that I might never have, and this idyllic, and I'm very idealistic. So I feel like you living in the clouds, I'm like right there with you of just like, I'm going to go home this time and it's going to be different and it's going to be better. And then whenever that doesn't happen, or, just honestly with the way my family structure is, that beautiful family image in my head is never going to be my reality. And for a long time, I didn't accept that because it meant that I had to grieve that I might, if I can't accept it now, I might never in the future be able to have this. And I so am a person who wants to hold to hope. But I was also, that hope I was having made me highly codependent and attached to the journeys of other people. And so the healthier I've gotten in my own journey towards being a non-codependent person, it's also meant that I've had to detach from desiring or wanting anything to be different in other people. And so that has been I mean, that is like, I think in my life, the big area of like a brokenheartedness,
Yeah.
that it's not the same thing as like a dream that I had for my life that I made a choice I regretted, but that I can't save them. I can't fix them.
That's right.
And that means that I have to grieve.
Yeah.
And that is, that for me, that is continually painful.
Yeah.
And I also continually hold on to hope. It's like in both hands for me. And the other piece of that is I wanted to be a female pastor. And I was a really big part of my church, and my Christian faith was everything to me. And whenever that slowly dissolved and I started questioning my faith, and then the people around me questioned me, I had envisioned my life, in my marriage, in my children, in my future to look this certain way with a certain faith, and it was very perfect.
Probably like
and
in
then
a box, and it like had pretty picture. Yeah.
It was clear. I knew exactly what marriage was supposed to look like. I knew exactly what my my future children would look like. And I knew exactly what friendship was supposed to look like. And when that deconstructed, it shook my entire reality. And I'm in a really stable place with it now. Like, it's something that I have really grieved my Christian faith. I think the thing that I am ongoing grieving is that sense of like-minded community. But yes, I think, and I don't know if this, I want to circle back and make sure this is helpful. But I think with, and I don't know if they heard this in my story and in your story both, but I think there was this place of, am I able to see what really is? Am I able to be honest with myself about what is really happening? And that is like the way we get through, is we have to be honest. Like, am I willing to be honest with myself about what is really happening, and not living in that fantasy, and not living in what I wish would be, and not mistaking that as hope. Because if you're a dreamer like me, it can be really hard to let, but I wanted it. It was so perfect in my mind. But if the reality isn't that, then we're not living true.
Right. My dad always says hope is not a strategy.
Darn it. I hate that.
Right? It's like, dang, hope is not a strategy. It's true though.
Yes.
You know, you have to, like, what I learned I have a family dynamic that I had to realize my desires will not be theirs. And I had to grieve that. My desire for their life, my desire for my relationship with them will not be their desire. And that is so painful, because that makes you face neglection, abandonment, rejection, all of those things that like, you so badly never want to experience. And so whenever you face that, like whenever you see them, you're reminded of that. And that's really, really hard. But the beauty is that you can form that in other relationships. I think that's, but you have to grieve that. You have to grieve, my desire will not be their desires. Oh my gosh. Listen,
I hear her. She's squeaking.
She's so,
I
let me
love her.
check her real quick. She's like,
okay.
Hey, come here, little one. Come here, come say hi. Come say hi. Okay, so let's do another question.
You're getting so many likes. She's so cute.
You're frozen.
I'm here.
I'm back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, your face is frozen right now. I see a picture of you.
Okay, well, hopefully I'll be back soon.
So we're going to talk about, let's see, how should you handle grieving the loss of a friendship from someone who was so toxic? And it kind of goes back to what we're talking about. Like, you have to grieve that relationship will never be what you want it to be, right? It will never be able, if the person is a toxic person, it will never be able to evolve into what you hope for, right?
Yeah, and I think too, like you'll always have to sacrifice a piece of your integrity to be a part of it, which doesn't feel as bad as the initial grief, but it will be an ongoing pain.
Yeah.
And that often will eventually just lead to a blow up anyway, but sometimes can just lead to so much dissatisfaction and can even keep you from creating those life-giving relationships that you really want. At least that's been my experience, that whenever I hold on to something that's not working,
Yeah.
I can only hold on so long before it gets unbearable or I build resentment, and then it falls apart in a much unhealthier way than if I had just set boundaries and grieved what it couldn't have been.
Oh, that's so true. Sometimes it's more painful to try to hold on to it than to let it go.
Yeah. They're both painful, though. I mean, I don't want to deny they're both incredibly painful.
I would have to say that I had to let go of a few toxic relationships, and that was, I mean, it was as equally as painful as being in it. But I think it was interesting. I was talking to my friend Tony, and we were talking about how why is it that what you were maybe experiencing that was toxic? Why is it that wasn't, it didn't seem, when you look back, it didn't seem that it was that painful as it is right now, and you're not in it anymore. Yeah. You have let go, but you're dealing with the ramifications and the debris from that storm, but you didn't know it was a storm you were in. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you almost didn't know how bad it was, and like I think sometimes it's also regret that catches up.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
True. Yeah.
Like, I wish I would have done this differently. I actually just sat down with an old friend and it was not a healthy relationship, and I ended that friendship years ago, and I did it in a very unhealthy way because it's all I had access to. And then addressing that because I hadn't dealt with my own stuff, because not all the time, but I think often when we're in unhealthy friendships, we're an unhealthy match. So we often don't see the way that like we're a perfect mirror to that in our own way. And not to say this is not the same thing as victim blaming at all, but the healthier we get, the harder it is to stay in those toxic relationships.
That is very true. Yeah.
And so like for me, I've had to really look back and say like, why was I a perfect match for that? And that requires so much grief, because it means grief not just for what happened to us, but for the things that we did or the ways that we allowed ourselves to be in situations that weren't supportive. And that to me, that can feel, the things that I've done can feel harder to me than the things that other people have done to me.
Yep. Yep. That is so good. That's so true. Well, we have like 12 minutes. I hate that I can't see your face though.
Oh, you still can't see me? I can see my, oh no.
I wonder
if I'm connected.
You want to try to join again?
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Okay.
BRB.
Okay, y'all, in the interim, this little girl wants to say hi. She just she's such an attention hog. She's been crying all the time, wanting to hang out. She's so mad that I knocked her off the bar stool. Okay, let's bring Madison back in. Let's see if this works. Look at her. She doesn't even want to like engage or talk or anything. She just wants to be right there. There we are. Yay. Good.
Yay. Okay.
Okay.
I'm surprised my dog hasn't been in here trying to get in the video too. She's been off somewhere else.
I almost crated her. And she's like typically a chill dog, but
no, don't do that. We like her here. Everyone's enjoying her. Everyone's enjoying this.
She's
trust
been
me.
Making the weirdest chicken purring noises ever. We only have like 12 more minutes left, so I want to go ahead and ask people to ask any question that they want in the feed, and in the interim, I'd love to just go ahead and talk about maybe some books that you recommend to some of your clients. I have two in particular, but I know you've seen so many different stories of people going through different waves of grief. And so what are some books that you would recommend somebody to read?
Well, I always recommend option B, which you actually said, because it's so good. Yeah. And then the other two I'd recommend would be Let Go Now, Embracing Detachment. It's a book about codependency. Wow. Elise Grice recommended it to me earlier this year, and I've read it 4 times. Okay. I mean, it's more of a daily devotional. Cool. So I like to listen to it on Audible when I drive because it's like little short snippets of things that are very practical. And they're not so much about how to cope with grief directly, but it's a book about codependence. And so the way I see that, it is about consciously letting go of needing anything outside of you to be different before you have inner peace. And if you are someone who's an empath or who's been through a hard situation or has had toxic relationships, chances are you're a person who is very giving of yourself and a dreamer and like all the things we've said. So I think it'd be a really supportive book. And then the third is Emotional Agility. Because it is all about feeling our feelings and learning to have a healthy relationship with our emotions. And I do not think we can go through a healthy grief process, or we can call it a process, just a grief season, without understanding that all of our emotions are healthy and beautiful and human, and there's no wrong way to feel. There's no wrong way to feel. And so emotional agility is all about learning how to be with the things that we feel in a very human and compassionate way, as opposed to shoving down and shaming. So those are my 3 favorites.
You know, I think too, emotions are the road. They are part of the road that leads us closer to understanding this is an opportunity. Why am I responding this way? Why do I feel this way? I mean, that's the one thing for me. It's kind of like, okay, I need, like this, if this is what I'm feeling, this is telling me something inside of me. And that's just an opportunity. And I think you can shift your perspective that way of like, I'm so grateful that I'm learning this about me, instead of feeling guilty or ashamed that you're learning that about you. A book I would recommend would be How to Survive the Loss of a Love. It is an unbelievable book. It talks about, they actually have a whole section on obvious losses, not so obvious, limbo losses, loss related to age. But it's done in poetry form, but it also has tactical to like apply to your life. And it's written by 2 psychologists and a poet. It is an old book.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It's a really, really good book. It's one of the top 12 books that psychologists recommend for people that are experiencing a loss of a love. Ironically, it's called How to Survive the Loss of a Love. That one, and option B is one. And then the other book I would recommend would be I Thought It Was Just Me. And that book's Brené Brown's first book. And it's so good because it identifies the difference between shame and guilt, which I think can be very tied closely to our grieving process, because we feel ashamed, feel alone, and we feel guilty because of it.
Yeah. And I wanted to just ask about the first book that you mentioned, for those who had written in about friendship. I haven't read that book. Would you say it'd be good for those who are wrestling through the loss of a friendship? Absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't.
Okay. That's good to know.
There's parts in it, that talks directly about maybe like a more intimate relationship. Then there's parts that I'm like, it's just about the loss of somebody you love. Like, not necessarily a romantic love, but maybe a friendship. Yeah. I mean, this book helped me understand why I felt the way that I did. Let me show you something. What's cool is that the table of contents are like healing, growing. There's no chapters, so you can read it really easily. I write in my book. That. Shows you the healing process, how it progresses and regresses. I mean, it's an old book. It's written in like the 60s, and it is, 76.
I would love to recommend a mentor of mine. Just if anyone has a chance to listen to any podcasts by her, her name is Laren Alta. And if you just Google her name, you will find, she doesn't have a book, but something that I'm taking a program by her called Devotion. And we're actually talking about systemic trauma and grief of, people who don't have access. So not just, again, the grief of losing something, but the grief of not being given privilege or being disabled or being a woman of color, and what awakening to that looks like in your life when it comes to societal change and patriarchy, which I know is like another layer of grief. It's not the same type of grief that we were necessarily talking about.
Yeah.
But Laren went through, and not just tell her story, but she shares it openly on a podcast, where she goes through a really intense breakup, and she describes the healing process as a spiral. And I just love that, of like, it's not, you're not just going to get better and better and better and for the end of time.
It's so true.
Growth and healing are a spiral. And she just talks about how there were days that she just like took a bath. And that's like the thing that she did that day. And this is a woman who is so successful, and we're so obsessed with productivity. And I think what she really gives when she talks about her grief is some humanity in that the process is messy. Yeah. And some days taking a bath can be the big win for the day.
Oh, I relate.
And I love that. Yeah, that's like, not even making the bed, not even brushing your hair, but just like taking a bath.
Taking a bath. I mean, I've taken more. At one point, I was taking like 2 baths a day, and I was like,
yes,
probably like another hobby.
Yes, her name was Laren, Lerin, Alta, Alta. And if you just Google her name, you'll get her website. And she has some really beautiful, rich work on what she calls shatter points and trauma, and then her own grief. So yeah, she's a beautiful resource.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. That's so good. There was something I listened to recently that would be really good for people that are listening in to look up. You look up Lecrae, Lecrea or Ae? Ae.
Ae, yeah.
Ae. If you look up his talk on Plywood People, just YouTube Lecrae Plywood People. It is one of the best. I listened to it again today, and he had done this talk, I guess, like 2 years ago. He had went through a really dark time in his life, and he actually uprooted a lot of trauma from when he was younger that had to do with family members, and then experiencing success, and then it plummeting, and all these different things. And he just talks about his dark time. But there was a quote that he said that I wanted to share as we close, because we have 2 minutes before it cuts us off. And I want to thank everybody, and especially Madison, for you being so vulnerable and honest. And just like anybody that wants to check you out, like we'll have, your link attached to this video. Once we upload it on YouTube, we'll have this for people to watch again, and it will be available for 24 hours. But I love this quote. He said, "I had to embrace the trauma and let it mold me into someone new. The shift is being willing to die to whatever we were before the pain, to birth the person we are becoming." I thought that was just beautiful. And that's what we've been talking about. Being able to allow the pain to shape us and let go of our past self and embrace who we are meant to be. And sometimes, not sometimes, it's just going through grief helps mold us into that. When you say,